gospel, we have a very long story, but it's about the man who was born blind. And at first his disciples asked him, "Rabbi," he said, "who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And this comes from a thought process at this time that when something bad happened to you, when you were sick, it was God that was punishing you for your sin. Okay? This is how my theology began when I was 3 or 4 years old. And I was sick. And my brother, who was a year older than me, told me, God was punishing you for something that you did wrong. It took years of psychotherapy to get over what my brother taught me. No, I'm kidding. But it's an interesting question, okay? Was it this man's sin or his parents' sin that caused this blindness? And what I want to talk about to begin with, I'm going to have 2 different parts to this sermon, is the influence that our parents have on our lives. And if you haven't realized it from my preaching already, our parents have a profound influence, both positively and negatively, on our lives. When people come in and see me, I rarely talk about what's happening in their life today. I ask them, what was your childhood like? Because the answer to our problems and issues often lie in our childhoods. And then I'll take it a step further. And what was your grandparents' life like? Because they often say, oh, my mother or my father, they had a difficult life. I said, explain that to me. What was difficult about that life? And if they don't know, I tell them, try to find out. From an aunt or uncle or somebody, try to find out what their life was like. Because truly, a lot of our suffering, a lot of our problems lies in a generational issue. And it's not just our parents. It could be grandparents and great-grandparents and great-grandparents. And many of us do not know any of these issues. But after we find out about the hurt and pain, then the burden is upon us. What do we do with this information? What do we do when we find out that our parents maybe weren't the best parents and they had their faults? What we do is try to understand why they were the way they were, and then forgive them and move forward. My daughter-in-law, Scott's wife, Casey, her dad is the police chief of Edmonton. And all of you saw what was going on in Edmonton. And when I saw Dale address the media that morning, he was woken up from a deep sleep at 1 o'clock in the morning with the worst news that any police chief wants to hear. And he immediately went to the scene and he saw what had taken place. And he was up for almost 20 hours at his office trying to deal with this situation. And it's a very sad story, and we've heard about the policemen who died and about their families. But there's another question we need to ask. What was this 16-year-old boy's life like? He died tragically also. Okay? He died tragically also. And the 16-year-old boy from a family that is from parents who did a decent job in raising them does not do these kinds of things. He probably suffered from some kind of mental problem or illness. And I'm sure there's a story that goes back to his parents and maybe the next generation, and we haven't even heard about that story. We can be very quick to judge and to be angry and aghast at the behavior of people. But we have to try to understand, why are they the way they are? Why were they the way they were? What caused this great pain in their life? And I don't know if we'd ever know the story, but there is one. And the thing we have to do is to forgive. When you figure out your own story and you figure out your parents' story and your grandparents' story, that's the only thing you can do, is to forgive and to understand and to move forward. This is what we're called to. And there's less of a chance of us hurting and damaging our own children if we do the forgiveness. And for many people, they have not yet moved forward. The other portion I want to talk about is the last segment of this story, is when the Pharisees became very indignant at Jesus. And it says, some of the Pharisees near him heard this, and they said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" And Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." Some of the most difficult words in the gospel for us to understand. What do these words mean? And I looked it up in the commentaries, and everybody has a different idea, and I have an idea too. Our eyes are one of the most discriminatory parts of our body. Okay? Our eyes are one of the most discriminatory parts of our body. And what I mean by that is we use our eyes immediately to make a judgment about other people. We are all prejudiced to some extent, in that when we see somebody, we see a situation, we prejudge that person. When we see the way a person is dressed, we make a judgment about them. If somebody is wearing a turban, we make a judgment about them. If somebody is wearing a black hat in Montreal or New York City, and they have their long curly sideburns, we make a judgment about them. If somebody is shabbily dressed, we make a judgment. If somebody is stumbling down the street, we make a judgment about them. And maybe that's what Jesus is saying, is that your eyes are causing this judgment in your lives. Just imagine if you meet somebody for the first time and your eyes are closed or you're unable to see them. It might be a totally different experience. There was a movie made about 20 years ago based on a true story, At First Sight. And it's about a man who was born blind, and then in his 20s he fell in love with a woman who was working for an ophthalmologist and knew about this new surgery. And when he had the surgery, and when he's finally able to see, it totally changed his life, and not in a good way. Shocking. Shocking. He wished that he could go back without being able to see. Because he embraced the world. He embraced his relationships without having this vision, without having this judgment that seems to be built into ourselves. And it changed his whole life, and not in a better way. Something for us to consider and realize that we all do this to some extent or another. And if we were blind, we would truly be able to see what another person is like. We truly would be able to see the way they truly are. And maybe that's what God is calling us to. Amen.
Dancing in the light of God. Amen.